Please sit down. I welcome you to this budget meeting at full council at Totton Town Hall. This meeting is also recorded by the council for subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site. Please note this meeting may be filmed by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. Although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include the public seating areas, members of the public attending the meeting should be aware that we cannot guarantee that you will not be filmed or recorded by others attending the meeting. By entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings. As chair of the meeting, I have the discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in my opinion, continuation of the filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individual, or may lead to the breach of a legal obligation by the council. Before starting the items, please can the Democratic Services Officer confirm with our sound and audio engineer that there are no issues with the streaming of this meeting so far and it is available to the public.
Madam Mayor, I confirm the meeting is being filmed live and the recording is taking place.
Thank you. I wanted to set out some important health and safety information for attendees to note. There is a long-running and lately more heightened risk to health and safety of the elected representatives. As a council, there is an overarching responsibility to ensure that the councillors are able to carry out their duties and responsibilities in a safe environment and without any risk of harassment, intimidation or violence. Therefore, if any interruption is deemed as a risk to the health and safety of the attendees, security will immediately take reasonable action to eliminate the risk and remove the individual from the meeting room. There will be no risk taken to preserve the safety of attendees, and I ask that attendees note this information. If any issues arise, I will explain the procedures. Item 2, apologies for absence.
Madam Mayor, I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Abela, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Culverwell, Councillor Opoku, Councillor Barnes, Councillor Simmons-Sappho, Councillor Harrison-Milan, and apologies for lateness from Councillor Gordon.
Thank you. Item 3, late items of urgent business.
Madam Mayor, there is one item of business which could not be available earlier and which will need to be dealt with at this meeting. Item 13, the budget amendments. Council Standing Order 15.8b allows amendments to recommendations to be put forward by 10 a.m. on the day of the meeting.
I accept this as late business. Item 4, declarations of interest. Under the Council's agreed code of conduct, members are required to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest and prejudicial interest as defined by the code at any meeting and may not participate in any discussion or vote on the matter and must withdraw from the meeting room. Details of the requirement to make a declaration of interest are shown on your printed summons at item 4. Should you need to make any such declaration, you should do so now by clearly stating the reasons and the nature of the interest. Members with a sensitive interest, as defined in the code, must declare that they have a disclosable interest, but the details of that interest need not be disclosed. Would anyone like to declare an interest? Councillor Ibrahim.
Thank you. I'm just declaring, as I have done every year at Budget for Council since 2014, that I'm a full-time representative of Unison branch representing local government staff for another borough.
Thank you. Item 5, declaration in relation to unpaid community charge or council tax liability.
Madam Mayor, may I remind members of the need to consider whether they need to make a declaration in accordance with Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 in relation to unpaid community charge or council tax liability, which is 2 months or more outstanding. This requirement is detailed in the council summons. Members to whom this applies must make a declaration if they are present at any part of the meeting and must not vote on any matter relating to the budget. It is not sufficient for such members to refrain from voting or to absent themselves from the chamber for particular parts of the meeting, and failure to make a relevant declaration constitutes a criminal offence.
Item 6, minutes of council meeting. I call on the Chief Executive.
Madam Mayor, I would ask the council to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of November 2024.
Are they agreed? They are agreed. Item 7. As mayor of this gloriously diverse borough, I get to meet so many wonderful people, and often I get to meet them again. I think I have been very lucky. I'm so pleased that I chose Mind in Haringey as my charity. Deborah and Lynette know all the voluntary organisations, people, places, and the workings of the voluntary sector. In my first week as mayor, the Haringey Community Collaborative was launched, and I was lucky enough to be reacquainted with an old work colleague who now works with the National Lottery allocating the community fund. We all know that money is tight in the council and the mayor's office has no budget, but I would regularly meet organisations that needed extra money. When I was young, I rather fancied myself as a matchmaker, which was fun, but my greatest success was an on-off 20-year relationship that is best forgotten. I have, however, been able to matchmake some funders to organisations. The Dinner Project has the very achievable aim of donating £10,000 to ARC Resettlement Services. ARC work to house ex-offenders and help them settle into happy, full, law-abiding lives. Last week, Lynette, the CEO of Mind in Haringey, and I met our honorary recorder, Judge Dodd, at Wood Green Crown Court, and the judges have agreed to donate seized monies regularly to Mind in Haringey. The judges wanted to give to a local functional charity, and there's some justice in criminal money going to a charity that works to prevent criminality. Other smaller charities have received money from the Community Fund, and it has been satisfying introducing small charities such as Bright Stars to the Haringey Community Collaborative and to the Community Fund. It all adds up and makes a difference. Yesterday, I walked the Whittington Walk, and I would like to thank all those who made a donation to my Just Giving page. I have my fundraiser coming up on March 27th to raise money for Mind in Haringey. It promises to be an entertaining evening, and I hope to see many of you there. I would like to thank the Alevi Centre and the Turkish and Kurdish community for their help with this event. Haringey enjoyed a visit from the King to Tottenham Stadium. It was a successful visit where he shot a hoop and shook hands with the crowd that had gathered outside. I curtsied dutifully. Despite our financial challenges, Haringey feels good. I would now like to invite Councillor Peacock to say a few words in memory of Irene Robertson, a Labour councillor for Bruce Grove between 1998 to 2006, and also Nigel Knowles, a Labour councillor for Knowle Park Ward between 1982 and 1987. Both these former councillors sadly recently passed away.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Irene Robertson represented Bruce Grove Ward from 1998 to 2006, and she actually also lived in the ward. She was Deputy Committed Ward Councillor for Bruce Grove, and over her 8 years, she saw this as central to the role. She developed good relationships with officers that would push hard to get what constituents needed if necessary. In her first term, Cabinet Government and Scrutiny were introduced, and she became the first chair of Scrutiny, working closely with some excellent officers to establish the function. Some of their groundbreaking work got national attention. In her second term, she became Deputy Lead for Environment, again working closely with officers and with, at that time, Councillor Ray Dodds. She hugely valued their working relationships and developed a keen interest in bins. I think that's when the wheelie bins came in. Another role was her chair of often challenging neighbourhood forums, which was part of Tottenham, which don't exist anymore. She often managed to turn critics into friends, and her skill in managing meetings, but more thoroughly her follow-up of things that needed to be addressed. During Herbie Brown's period as mayor, she was often his escort, and there, along with Herbie, her dear colleague, she worked to grace these occasions with civic pride. She felt deeply that this is too often overlooked, but knew how much the right word from the mayor or his escort matters for people. She loved her work for Bruce Grove, Tottenham and Haringey, and truly gave it her all. Nigel Knowles. Nigel came on Haringey Council in 1982 and left in 1987 to stand for Parliament in Kidderminster. Unfortunately, he failed to get elected, but was later elected to their council and later on became their mayor. When he was on Haringey Council, he represented Knoll Park Ward, and I was pleased to serve at that time on the committee that selected him to stand as a Labour candidate, along with Narendra McKenzie and John Brennan, all sadly have now all passed away. Whilst he was on Haringey, he became the chair of what was then Public Works Committee. He is fondly remembered by all of us who knew him. Thank you.
Please can we stand in 1 minute silence to remember Irene and Nigel. Please be seated. Item 8, report from the Chief Executive.
Madam Mayor, I have no matters to report.
Item 9, I call on the Monitoring Officer.
Madam Mayor, I have no matters to report.
Item 10, review of the Council Tax Reduction Scheme administration for 2025-2026. I call on Councillor Shandwani to move the report together with any recommendation it contains.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Council Tax Reduction Scheme, or CTRS, is a replacement to the council tax benefits that residents used to get before abolished by the Tory and Liberal Democrat coalition government. Whilst it does not protect as many residents, nor at the same scale as its predecessor, in Haringey we have strived to protect the most financially vulnerable, including people with disabilities and low-income families with children. Tonight, I'm here to seek approval to make no changes to the CTRS criteria for the next financial year, or 25-26. This year, I'm pleased to say that we've seen a drop in the number of residents who are claiming CTRS. Our residents are increasing their income either through our work to increase take up of social security, of the unclaimed £19 billion a year welfare available, or getting employment or higher paid employment. This is thanks to the work of the financial support team, Haringey Works, Haringey Learns, our free childcare offer, to name a few, and of course our partners for providing assistance and opportunities to residents who can enter the work market. That's the best way to support our residents long-term and in a meaningful way. I want to use this opportunity to reiterate that those claiming CTRS or any type of benefit are not scroungers. A significant proportion of our residents on CTRS are working. Many are in jobs that keep our capital going, in care industry, in cleaning services, delivering our food, and a vast majority of those are from ethnic communities. For example, like this 67-year-old lady in my ward, she has not one cleaning job, not two cleaning jobs, but 3 cleaning jobs that span over 15 hours a day. This is not somebody that's a scrounger, and this is not somebody who's lazy. There are those, of course, who cannot work, like a young 26-year-old man who has non-verbal autism, and his mother has to dress him, bathe him, clothe him, and feed him. Her ability to work is also hindered, as she saves us thousands of pounds a year, as we don't have to provide that care. This is who CTRS protects from additional financial burden. It's about equity. especially in a borough that has the second highest wealth disparity in the UK, with some of our wealthiest parts of the country in our borough meets the most poorest from one end of the W3 bus route to the other. It's right that we redistribute to make Haringey a fairer place. Madam Mayor, despite the different colour of rosettes that we often wear, I know that everyone here has the same ethos to support our residents as much as possible, and I hope all sides in the chamber support this paper this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the report? Are the recommendations at page 21 and 22 agreed? They are agreed. Item 11, reports from Cabinet, General Purposes Committee and Audit Committee. We have 3 reports to consider as part of this item. A report from Cabinet, a report from the General Purposes Committee and a report from the Audit Committee. I first call on Councillor Williams, Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning and Deputy Leader, to move her report on the Housing Revenue Account.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Haringey is committed to fairer housing. That means making sure our residents have safe, stable, warm and comfortable homes. We invest our housing budget, that is the Housing Revenue Account, HRA, into repairing and renovating our existing council homes and into building new homes for people on the waiting list. We want both existing council tenants and new council tenants to live in high quality homes, and for more families and individuals in the borough who need the security of social housing to be able to set down roots and thrive here. Some of the key investments we are making in existing council homes include improving kitchens and bathrooms, keeping estates safer, keeping homes warm and dry, and making them cheaper to heat. Plus, of course, our major works programme, which is already seeing investment at Knoll Park Estate, Edgecote Grove, soon online at Stella House and Kenneth Robbins, just to name a few. It is expected that as investment in new and existing homes increases in the coming years, the number of repairs and therefore cost of repairs will come down. So setting a sustainable HRA has become significantly more challenging in recent years. Higher interest rates and inflation are driving up costs across the board. Construction costs have been rising for some years, increasing the costs of repairs and, of course, important building safety works. But despite many pressures, we are able to invest in existing homes and neighbourhoods at the same time as building thousands of new, genuinely affordable homes that local people desperately need. We're investing in at least 3,000 new, genuinely affordable council homes by 2031. 2,000 of which are already underway and 700 of which already have new families moved in and leading their lives there. As well as capital investment, the HRA delivers important services to our tenants and leaseholders, including tenancy services, income services, including our amazing financial inclusion service, estates and neighbourhood services, so that residents that need support are able to live well in their homes and communities. The HRA budget reflects what we need to be able to do to continue to provide services to our tenants and leaseholders, to invest in their homes and to build those thousands of new homes that we desperately need. Thank you.
Are there any questions on the report? Thank you. The recommendation on the Housing Revenue Account appears to be under budget item 13, when it will be decided on. I next call on Councillor Johnson, Chair of the General Purposes Committee, to move her report on the annual pay policy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the report and its recommendations. Thank you.
Has anyone got any questions? Are the recommendations at page 257 agreed? I next call on Councillor Dogan to move his report on Treasury Management Statement. Are there any questions? Thank you. The recommendation on the Treasury Management Strategy appears under budget item 13 when it will be decided on. Item 12. We have received a deputation from Mr. Paul Burnham in relation to item 13 on the budget. This was in accordance with Council Standing Order 2.6. Mr. Burnham is joined by Michael Hodges and Florence Alloway. Mr. Burnham, please come forward to the microphone and you have 5 minutes to make your representation.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Council. It's just Paul Burnham and Florence Alloway here. Last December, Haringey's income collection team messaged tenants advising us to eat leftover food over Christmas and to take up free activities like going for long walks outside in the cold. Colleagues, whatever we think about the specific advice, these messages showed an honest appreciation of the self-denial required from tenants to pay the existing rents. And now in this budget, we have more increases. We know that Haringey, alongside 100 other councils, took part in an appeal to the new Labour government lobbying for rent convergence, which could mean annual rent increases of CPI inflation plus 1%, plus £4 a week, plus whatever service charges there may be. And we know that the direction of national rent policy is open for change at the present time. And so we urge the council to oppose these mistaken increases, of which a bit more later. Now on to the service charges, which you can find on page 582 of your reports pack. And you'll also see there 2 excess charges. Firstly, 21% increase for cleaning the communal areas of blocks. And this follows a 46% increase for the same thing last year. This affects 7,000 tenants and in effect 4,000 leaseholders as well. Secondly, there's a 29% increase for cleaning the hallways in converted street properties. This affects 700 tenants and this went up by 92% last year. And the residents tell us that they're dissatisfied with the work standards, unsure about whether or not the service is needed at all, and very angry about the continual increases. And all of this is in breach of the government's rent statement, which says that councils should endeavour to keep service charges down to CPI plus 1% each year. There's no way that Haringey is complying with that. So just finish with a couple of recommendations. Firstly, please refuse to accept those excess service charges using a scrutiny review process if necessary. Secondly, alongside residents, the council should lobby government for direct housing investment, which has happened many times over the years, leading to the construction of our homes. That investment could and should be without rent or service charge increases and with debt write-off and with grants for fire safety, for major works and so on. And finally, we are the rebel borough. This is even more important in the present state of world events. We therefore look forward to working with you on the above points. Thank you for listening.
Are there any questions from councillors for the deputation? I call on the Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning to respond.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul and Florence, for coming in and speaking to us on this. So we don't actually propose any changes in the rent setting policy from previous years. We set our rents in accordance with the rent standard. This means that for 25-26, existing rents will rise by the Consumer Price Index plus 1%. Rents on new tenancies are set in accordance with the rent formula, with the exception, as you know, of certain newly built council homes where rents are set by London Affordable Rent, as agreed by Cabinet and by this full council. Council tenants' rents, of course, enable us as their landlord to ensure that their homes are managed and maintained, and the HRA has to balance the out with the in from the rents. The council had been increasing service charges in line with inflation for several years, but as you know, we moved from that because CPI plus 1% creates a diversion between the cost to the council of providing services to tenants and the amount it charged tenants for those services, and that grows. If service charges are not reset just at what we call full cost recovery, the cost of providing services, the gap would continue to increase, and of course that means that the HRA was covering the shortfall, which would then further result in tenants who do not receive services subsidising those who do, which is fundamentally unfair. So you mention a couple of percentage increases to service charges, and just highlighting those two is sort of misleading because it just easily paint a different picture by only, for example, highlighting the 15% decrease in communal lighting costs, or the 9% reduction in grounds maintenance, or the approximately 30% saving on heating costs across 6 of our housing estates. The fact is, overall service charges have only increased by 0.22% for 25-26. And we must manage our properties effectively to provide safe and comfortable homes, which is key to our fairer housing pledge. And to do this, we set all our service charges to fully recover costs. I think that covers the points you raised this evening, Mr. Burnham, but again, thank you very much for coming and speaking to us about it this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Burnham, for your representations. You and your colleagues can return to your seats and we will continue with the budget item. Item 13, Budget and Medium-Term Financial Strategy 2024 to 29. I will start by asking the Monitoring Officer to give the meeting some advice in respect of the voting requirements for budget votes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Local Authorities Standing Orders England Amendment Regulations 2014 and the Council Standing Orders require the Council to record in the minutes how each councillor voted, including any abstentions, when determining the Council's budget and the level of council tax to be levied. The only requirement is to record in the minutes of the meeting how each member voted. Given there are 4 amendments and a substantive motion to be voted on, it could be recorded in the minutes of the meeting how each member voted, including any who have abstained, by a show of hands.
And I therefore ask that the advice is noted and acted on when we come to the voting on this item, including the amendment. Is that agreed? I will now set out the process for considering this item, which will be as follows. I will firstly call upon Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services, Councillor Carlin, to introduce the report and move the recommendations contained at page 278 of the agenda pack. This is section 3.1, recommendations A to N. Up to 15 minutes will be allowed for this. This will then be seconded by the Leader of the Council, who will have 5 minutes. I have received notice of 4 amendments to the budget from the Liberal Democrat Group. The amendments from the Liberal Democrat Group will then be moved by Councillor Corley Harrison, who has up to 5 minutes, and then seconded by Councillor Connor, who has 3 minutes. In accordance with Council Standing Orders 15.6, the Independent Socialist Group leader will have 2 minutes to also respond to the budget speech. There will then be a debate. The debate will be up to 45 minutes and members will be asked to keep their contributions to 3 minutes only. At the conclusion of the debate, Councillor Corley Harrison will respond for up to 3.5 minutes, followed by Councillor Carlin summing up for up to 10 minutes. The Council will then take a vote on the 4 amendments before moving to the substantive motion. We will now start this item. Councillor Carlin, please introduce the report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Despite our financial challenges, this administration tonight proposes a budget that protects the most vulnerable, enhances local public services, and delivers on local priorities. Haringey is a borough rich in diversity, creativity and talent. It is also a borough where life expectancy drops 8 years from west to east and where levels of deprivation are amongst the highest in the country. Despite challenges, we are well on the way to delivering at least 3,000 high-quality council homes by 2031. Our excellent programs, Haringey Learns and Haringey Works, supports local residents into employment. Our schools are almost good or outstanding. We've installed 34 school streets and improved routes for walking and cycling. We're planting thousands of trees. We protected thousands of private renters from bad landlords, with more than 1,600 rented homes improved on the back of council action. We assist residents who are struggling financially with advice, help with benefits, and in some cases with money, such as providing a winter fuel payment for pensioners not in receipt of pension credit and in financial need. Our driving ambition is to create a fairer, greener borough where everyone can belong and thrive. And it is within these parameters that our budget is set. After successive changes to the funding formula for local governments since 2010, Haringey has lost around, and you'll know this figure well, 143 million from our core funding. This is despite an increase in our population and a 24% increase in the number of our residents over the age of 65. In addition, our council tax reduction scheme put into place to mitigate the demise of council tax benefit supports around 23,000 low-income households and costs about £35 million a year. Haringey is still considered an outer London borough for funding purposes, although inner London for statistical ones, and receives less funding than some of our inner London neighbours. In the current financial year, like other boroughs, we've seen significant increased demand and a soaring cost for our services, specifically in terms of adults, social care, and temporary accommodation. Adult social care provides services to almost 4,000 residents in Haringey, with increases specifically in the number of working age adults suffering from ill mental health. While significant savings are proposed, I'm proud that this is a budget where we have protected the services our residents rely on and need. This is not only because it's the right thing to do in a borough such as ours, but because many of our services are preventative. Further cuts to frontline services, with many already made in the previous 15 years, can result in increased costs to our statutory services and to other public services further down the line, with residents and council less resilient in the face of increased need. However, it is important to ensure that every pound counts. Considerable work has been done over the past year to improve efficiency. Every contract is being looked at to make sure it provides value for money, and it's still needed. All our directorates are reducing the number of agency workers employed by the council. Our digital team is working with services to redesign how digital programs can be used, both to reduce costs and to improve resident experience. And we have a dedicated team providing project management support for plans that transform and improve services while also saving money. While we received 16 million in additional funding in this year's financial settlement, for which we are grateful, this was not enough to close the gap in our budget. The budget includes additional funding of 31 million for adult social care, 12 million for temporary accommodation, and 6.5 million for children's social care and SEND general fund services. And this is needed because of the increased numbers, cost, and complexity of these services. These big three areas are showing overspends in councils across the country. We have applied for, like other councils, and been given provisional approval for a maximum of 37 million in exceptional financial support, in the form of permission for us to use capital for revenue purposes. While this is required in order for us to set a balanced budget tonight, we appreciate this is not a sustainable position. We will continue to work across the council to reduce costs and to make every penny count. We intend to use as little capital as possible. In the longer term, we are pleased that the Labour government is pushing ahead to deliver fairer funding from 20 6/27. This was long promised by the previous government but not delivered. We are grateful for the funding that was allocated to us from the recovery grant, which is based on levels of deprivation and our relatively low council tax base. This indicates a willingness to reverse the short-sighted and harmful decisions that saw Haringey lose so much funding post-2010. In setting this budget, we have avoided the worst of cuts to our frontline services that some other local authorities have made. All our fantastic libraries are still open. Our leisure services are improving after being brought back in-house. Our parks are well maintained and getting new capital investment. Potholes are still being filled and our gullies are regularly cleaned to prevent flooding. This is a Labour budget. It protects our residents, prioritises local public services and shared public spaces. It will help us to build a fairer, greener borough. I move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I ask Councillor Ahmed, Leader of the Council, to second the recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry. I'm proud to second this balanced budget being presented today. And I would like to thank Councillor Carlin, who has done a fantastic job in leading the council through this budget process, along with our Director of Finance, Taryn Eves. I want to make this really simple. We have had 14 years of austerity and local government being slashed to the bone due to a political decision by the Tories and cheered on by the Liberal Democrats in government. 14 years of Tory failure and chaos brought so many councils to the brink while our economy flatlined. 14 years where the Tories sat back while the housing crisis has had a crippling impact on our residents. A government that focused on culture wars and not our community here in Haringey. This legacy means we have 143 million less in real terms each year since 2010. All London councils are being crippled by the cost of temporary accommodation. We spend about 60% of our budget on social care for our most vulnerable residents, and increased costs and demands mean less funding to go around for some of the other key services residents rely on. 30 councils up and down the country have been left going to government to get exceptional financial support. However, we still have hope. Last summer, I was delighted to see a Labour government elected. And while they were never going to turn around 14 years of austerity in a couple of months, we were delighted to receive an additional 16 million. Our Labour government has stepped in to ensure we can balance our budget, but councils shouldn't be living hand to mouth. We could do much more if given the proper funding our community needs, and we will work with the new government and our local MPs to bang the drum and make this case. Outer London funding doesn't cut it when we know we have the same issues as inner London. This legacy has left councils picking up the pieces. Our starting point to get to this budget was rightly to defend and protect the most vulnerable in Haringey. And this administration will always stand up for residents that need support and will always be there when residents need it most. Our residents and Labour councillors in this room know the value of good local services. I've been clear. We need to protect the frontline services our residents rely on. Finding savings after years of cuts is not easy, but we have continued to make efficiency savings to protect the frontline. We've worked hard locally to make sure this reflects our values here in Haringey. And despite these challenges, I do remain optimistic. This budget invests almost £1 billion to deliver our many local public services. Labour in power locally is delivering a greener and fairer Haringey. And I'm proud to say we are transforming our borough. I'm proud of the progressive manifesto we were elected on 3 years ago, and we've achieved so much. We are on track to deliver 3,000 council homes, one of the biggest delivery programmes in London. Over 700 people have already moved into council homes, and this is transformative for those families and about us taking action locally to tackle the housing crisis. Investment in parks, and as part of this, asking our residents what they want to spend the money on, genuine co-production. This budget invests 34 million on council tax reduction, protecting our most vulnerable residents. It invests in school streets, bike hangers and trees. It invests in our schools where 98% are now rated good or outstanding, giving young people in Haringey the best start in life. It allows us to keep our adults and children's social care services running. It keeps our libraries open, our youth services thriving, allows us to design and invest in our leisure services, finally back under democratic control. And it provides temporary accommodation to those impacted by the cost of living crisis and volatile private renters market. And I could go on. And there is still so much to do, and we remain ambitious. I am proud of the fair and greener borough this budget invests in. Thank you.
Councillor Corley Harrison, can I ask you to move your amendments?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to begin by thanking officers for their help in enabling us to submit these amendments. We're grateful for the time the finance team and all directors and departments have given us in recent weeks. I want to take you all back to my budget speech in 2022. You'll recall the 2022 budget, of course. It was the one where this Labour administration, despite a precarious financial position at the time, decided that they were not only going to go on their largest borrowing spree in Haringey's history, but at the same time, they were going to propose no new savings to manage the budget. How was it funded? By using up the council's reserves. Therefore, when times were tough, not as spare cash to use with abandon. The lead member for finance described how proud they were of that budget and what a privilege it was to present. We called it unprecedented, eye-watering, and a reckless decision in a reckless budget. To quote myself from that evening, given the pressures on the council's already stretched budget, can I ask the lead member for finance which services they plan to cut by 2026 to pay for this multi-million-pound hit on the council's revenue budget? Because they should be honest with residents about it now and not in 4 years' time. I gave Labour too much credit. I should have said in 3 years' time. Whilst our previous year's budgets have proposed savings, never accepted by this Labour administration, to protect and replenish our reserves position, Labour chose instead to whittle it down year on year or to plug the gap on unrealised savings. And look where we are now. The reserves are gone, the trust is gone, the money is gone, and the government bailout is in. Today's budget has been years in the making. Labour will blame others. Cost of services, sure. Cost of living, yes. Cuts to government financing, absolutely. All undeniable. But you cannot ignore the decisions the administration have made, particularly in the last decade, as those impacts have been felt. But before that, including a chronic lack of investment in the 50 years Labour has run the council. It does a disservice to your residents to so routinely claim that the blame never lies with yourselves. We were told that it will all change if we get the Tories out. We needed a Labour government for proper funding. Well, we have that now. And we are not even close to this Labour government funding councils properly. Presumably not Labour's fault either. That's not to say that the last couple of years have not seen dramatic increases in costs in some services. But with Labour, both in national government and local government, they hold all the cards to fix things. So why aren't they? Because of choices. As Councillor Hymer said in her recent resignation letter, Keir Starmer's government has refused to provide the funding to cover the rising costs of social care, support for children with special educational needs, and housing for those facing homelessness. This is a political decision. Last year, we were at a financial precipice. I said at the last budget, when Labour announced it was somewhat scaling back its borrowing plans, it is too late. With the council exposed to millions in repayments, absolutely swamping our budget within years, and this administration has no answer for that in the MTFS. No plan at all. A year on, we are tumbling free fall over a cliff edge, and the most important thing for this administration is to admit and acknowledge that they need help. They cannot fit their own parachute whilst they're in free fall. That is why the council must urgently request the professional external help needed to help steady the ship. Through the formation of a voluntary improvement board chaired by an independent expert and made up of independent specialists, councillors and officers to scrutinise, assess and rethink the finances to avoid further external financial dependencies. It must also urgently convene a new contract management board, again with a mix of internal personnel and independent external expertise to scrutinise the council's process when it comes to procurement, service contracts, contract procedure rules and contract spending. We welcome the council's formation of a gold board chaired by the chief executive and procurement board chaired by the finance director, especially with the Procurement Act having come into place last week. However, we feel that the council has found itself in a position where ongoing external expertise are now an absolute requirement. This has already been acknowledged by bringing in SIP firm 3110 in recent months. The value of external professionals and independent thinkers to support the work here the finance director and her team are doing, and such boards have been formed by other local authorities who have found themselves on the financial brink. It is absolutely crucial. My colleagues will talk through some of our other proposals, such as reducing the effective payday loan the council has secured from the government, through efficiencies which should already have been in this budget, and 2 pilot schemes which are almost no-brainers to accept and trial given the financial situation, especially when one would also improve the housing situation for many of our residents in temporary accommodation while saving the council millions of pounds a year. We hope that this year you will acknowledge these proposals in helping to support the council's financial footing and vote for them. Thank you.
Councillor Connor, can I ask you to second the amendment?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and fellow councillors. I rise today to formally second the opposition's amendments and speak in the spirit of collaboration. The clear message we can and must do better for the people of Haringey. That is why we're proposing clear and practical measures to improve governance, financial oversight and contract management. Measures supported by the findings in the recent KPMG audit report. First, we're calling for an establishment of the Voluntary Improvement Board. This board would include independent external members to provide expert advice and challenge officers. The Chief Executive has announced the overdue formation of the Gold and Silver Financial Recovery Groups, but these do not include any expertise from outside the Council. We must use this crunch point to bring in fresh thinking to tackle the complex challenges we face. Second, we're proposing a new contract management board to ensure the council gets value for money from its strategic contracts. This board would review contract procurement rules and scrutinise all major contracts against their original business case. Let us be clear, when public money is spent, residents expect results. Third, we're asking for quarterly financial updates to be provided to all scrutiny panels. The KPMG report reveals that budget monitoring throughout 23-24 was inconsistent and incomplete, with many saving schemes lacking even the basic progress reports. The updates we propose will give elected members a much needed opportunity to monitor in-year savings and ensure spending stays on track. And finally, we want to reaffirm a critical principle. Borrowing from central government under the exceptional financial support arrangement is not a sustainable long-term solution, and it should only ever be a last resort. KPMG makes it plain. The council's budget gap is not a one-off crisis. Without transformative action, this gap is projected to reach 132 million by 2030. This is not a sustainable path, and we must act now to implement stronger financial governance and adopt innovative solutions to secure Haringey's long-term future. We, the Lib Dems, understand that these are challenging times, but we also believe that challenges should drive innovation, not excuses. Our message is simple. Haringey deserves better. We must maximise the value of assets, tighten our grip on contract management, and think creatively about how we can generate income. These are not partisan issues, they're practical solutions that can deliver real results for our residents. Thank you.
Councillor Collette, can I ask you to respond to the budget speech?
Thank you. The Independent Socialist Group will vote against this budget. The much waited for Labour government was expected to support underfunded local services, the NHS, and to end austerity. Instead, they say they have no choice but to continue a policy of austerity. For Haringey, this means we cannot balance our budget and pay for adult social care, children's and school services, and homelessness. The government could have made different choices. They could have funded the NHS, supported local councils and international aid instead of funding arms manufacturers and war. They could have increased taxation for the richest. Councillor Armott asked the government to allow us to borrow money and to sell assets to avoid bankruptcy. She tells us she had no choice but to take the high-risk action, creating an uncertain future for our borough. After HDV and the Cobler leadership, Haringey were frankly in a terrible mess. An agreement was made to sell our housing and other assets to a private developer. When Haringey residents demonstrated, the HDV had to be abandoned. It was a lesson we still need to learn about working with residents. From libraries to parking permits to council housing with high void levels and low decent home standards and queues at unsupported food banks, our residents care and they are very worried. But there are still choices. The choices to keep our libraries open, improve our housing stock and work with our food banks and support those in most distress. Thank you.
There will now be a debate on the item for a period of up to 45 minutes. Each member wishing to speak will have 3 minutes only. I first call on Councillor Small.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am fairly new to politics, although I'm learning pretty quickly that it seems there are times you might rise to speak only to make grand declarations of your beliefs, or to speak only to make clear what you stand against rather than what you stand for. But somewhere along the way, you have to make room for the real meaning of politics, which is actually delivering for the people you represent. So as I'm discovering tonight, there are moments where you get to stand up and say, this is what we believe in, this is what we stand for, and this is what we are delivering. Because in the face of the worst cost of living crisis in decades, at a time when councils are struggling under the weight of rising demand, squeezed budgets, soaring costs, and the consequences of 14 years of government failure, Haringey is building homes. Not just promises, not press releases, but real, high-quality, affordable council homes for the people who need them most. Because as set out tonight, Madam Mayor, this Labour Council, this Labour administration is on track to deliver 3,000 new council homes by 2031. That's not a pledge, it's a plan for action. 2,000 homes already underway, more than 700 completed, with residents moved in, building lives, raising families, and looking to the future. And every single one of them is a statement of this administration's values. Our belief that every family deserves a secure home, that no child should grow up in substandard accommodation, and that housing is a fundamental right, not a privilege. Without sounding like an M&S advert, Madam Mayor, these aren't just ordinary homes. They are energy efficient, well-designed, accessible, well-integrated, and built to last. I have just listened to Councillor Connor talking about when public money is spent, we expect results. I think that is clearly a result, Madam Mayor. I also heard Councillor Cawley-Harrison speak about the choice to build 3,000 council homes as unprecedented and eye-watering, and I agree. I didn't quite catch, though, in his speech, which was spoken with such disdain, how many fewer council homes he would propose that Haringey has built. But, Madam Mayor, we cannot carry the burden alone. Local government finances are in crisis, and without a bigger and fairer funding settlement, the councils that build, that support, that protect will be left struggling to do their jobs. Nobody can reasonably expect to turn around 14 years of Conservative government failure, seeded by an era of austerity with Lib Dem fingerprints overnight. But that will not dampen this determination of this administration for a fairer funding settlement from the government. We are going to continue to be ambitious for Haringey residents, ambitious in our housing programme, and ambitious for a brighter future borough.
Councillor Ursula Gosling.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm speaking on Amendment 3, the proposal to create a voluntary council tax scheme. This is surely an idea whose time has come. I realise that This administration appears to have an ideological objection to such a scheme, but at this point, as the council is struggling for a bailout from a central government, it strikes me as that we are in no position to be picky. The new Section 151 officer has provided a useful analysis of how this idea might work, with income forecast to be between £60,000 and £600,000 per year, depending on the level of contribution asked for. Of course, this is hardly a revolutionary level of income, but at times like this, every little helps. After all, only last year, administration councillors have told us that they are powerless to prevent a partial closure of libraries around the borough due to the vital £675,000 savings provided. So ultimately, they're saying that they would rather slash libraries' provision than introduce a voluntary council tax scheme. The central argument in favour of this proposal is simple. What is the harm? What possible objection can override the financial imperative this council now faces? And if the scheme fails to make the money forecasted by our 151 officer, then it can be dropped. No harm done. In light of our budgetary position, I urged administration councillors to support Amendment 3. Thank you.
Councillor Grosskopf.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, councillors and residents of Haringey, I come before you today with some bad news, I'm afraid. The bad news is that I'm breaking tradition. Instead of sharing complaints or problems, I'm actually here with good news. It seems that at most full council meetings, we constantly we hear a constant stream of negativity from the opposition. Libraries supposedly closing, but actually didn't happen, and so on. But rarely do we take time to celebrate the positivity developments happening across our borough. Today, I want to change the narrative. There are loads of positive stories I could tell you, whether it is about Haringey multi-faith, the 3,000 new homes that are being built, and many more. But today, I want to concentrate on our priority to uphold Haringey's legacy of vibrant parks and green spaces, including at Markfield Park, which particularly is close to my heart. I want to highlight the rich history we have in Markfield. The history goes back to 1849, when Markfield Pump Station became the second of its kind in the country, with Manchester with the first. The site once housed smallpox hospital and even a pig farm during the Second World War. Allegedly, we had a royal visit too from Queen Mary, who came down to visit during that period. And notability, in 1986, Diana, the Prince of Wales, opened Markfield project, adding to our park's royal connections. As a councillor for this area and the chair of Friends of Markfield, I'm thrilled to share the truly exceptional announcement made last week. There will be a 1.5 million investment in 8 parks across the borough. This is transformative investment that will completely revitalise our crucial facilities for our community children. After years of my colleagues and from advocating for better play facilities, this funding means we can finally deliver modern accessibility and exciting play space that will serve families and generations to come. And Markfield is not alone. 7 other parks in the boroughs are due to receive this injection: Roos Castle, Downs Hill, Lordship Rec, Chestnut, Paynton, White Hart Lane Rec, and Belmont Rec. Will all receive funding and are all scheduled to be completed by spring 2026. These are the type of stories we should be hearing more often. This is why I live in Haringey, because of the amazing work that takes place here. Despite the budget cuts we have faced, this funding has come from the community infrastructure levy from the local development projects, ensuring that our borough grows, our community space improves as well. Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors and residents. Let's continue to celebrate and build upon these success stories.
Councillor Da Costa.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Colleagues, I rise in support of the Liberal Democrats Group's Amendment 4, amendment that saves money and provides stable homes for residents in temporary accommodation. Temporary accommodation costs around the country are spiralling out of control as part of a dysfunctional market, and Haringey is no exception. We're spending millions on B&Bs and nightly paid accommodation, money that should be spent on frontline services and tackling homelessness at its root. The ultimate solution, of course, has to be more building, and I congratulate the administration on continuing with that. But that takes time, and the numbers in temporary accommodation are rising so alarmingly that other ad hoc solutions will also be needed. An obvious start has to be increasing private sector leasing. Our proposal, a pilot to invest to save private sector leasing incentive scheme, would offer landlords a one-off upfront lump sum payment to attract them to partner with Haringey, instead of renting out properties in the private market. In doing so, we can reverse the trend of declining numbers of landlords offering up their properties to the council, reduce our most costly temporary accommodation, and save millions. We would like to thank the housing team's work on this proposal and the modelling they've done to provide us with this significant level of detail in our proposals. And the numbers are clear. Each PSL saves up to £70 per night as compared to hotels. A 15% annual increase in PSLs, which is a modest prediction of what this scheme could achieve, would save £1 million by 2026-27 and £4.5 billion per year by 2028-29. Incentives would attract and retain more landlords, cutting our reliance on costly B&Bs and nightly paid accommodation. Families deserve better than a revolving door of unsuitable hotel rooms. At the moment, we're paying £100 a night for substandard B&Bs, often miles from people's schools and jobs. And the private rent increase along London has made it even harder for the council to compete. This amendment will change that. It keeps landlords on board so families aren't left bouncing from accommodation to accommodation with no stability or security until they're eligible for a permanent home. Children stay in schools, not living out of suitcases. Parents keep their jobs, not being pushed miles from work, and families get real homes and not weekly uncertainty. Let's provide both stable, decent homes to our residents and find savings in our budgets. This practical, cost-effective and inevitable plan, this Invest to Save pilot, becomes a no-brainer, and we know it makes sense. So I do urge you to vote for this amendment tonight, but hopefully we see it in a future Labour budget. The only question is how much money we waste in the meantime. So please back the amendment, invest in long-term savings and proper homes for our residents. Thank you.
Councillor Dunstall.
Mayor, thank you, and good evening, everyone. We've heard a lot about the challenging financial context that we and other councils across London and the country continue to find ourselves in. The assault on local government funding and the kind of support we need locally simply cannot be delivered in 8 months of government. We will all know the deep homelessness crisis, how deep the homelessness crisis has become, whether from our surgeries or just from moving around the city. 14 years of Conservative austerity, kicked off with the help of our Liberal Democrat friends, has seen a horrifying and exponential increase in homelessness and rough sleeping, something which is perhaps among the most visible and visceral reminders of the cruelty behind so many of the decisions of those administrations. Last Thursday, MHCLG published their autumn 2024 rough sleeping snapshot. The picture was not a positive one. It showed a 20% increase in rough sleeping, and a single night estimate rose to 4,667 individuals, which is a 164% increase on the 2010 figure. Despite this, I was delighted to see that Haringey's services to support rough sleepers and those at risk received recognition from no other than the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty. In his annual report, Health in Cities, and following a visit to our Homeless Resource Centre, Mulberry Junction, just over the road, he highlighted that the service has a comprehensive service model with a commitment to accessibility and immediate support with as few barriers as possible. Mulberry Junction is our front door for an often incredibly complex, multiply disadvantaged and marginalised group. I'm not aware of another borough that provides the kind of multidisciplinary open access drop-in provision for rough sleepers and those at risk. As someone who has worked in homelessness and services for over 15 years, I see provision of this nature as absolutely pivotal in ending rough sleeping. The work of Mulberry Junction dovetails with our off-street accommodation at Osborne Grove, which is the first stage accommodation in a pathway of coherent and embedded support out of street homelessness and into intensive support services, which seek to reduce needs and move people into lower support and independent accommodation. This work was added to last year through the successful bid for the Mayor's Single Homelessness Accommodation Programme, which will see £3 million invested in additional services for tackling rough sleeping in the borough. That will create with £1 million going into additional Housing First units and the purchase of 10 one-bed flats for Housing First clients. I'm proud to be part of a borough that recognises the importance of this work and prioritises it through the innovative, evidence-led in-house delivery. It is evidence of our values in action that in these challenging financial times,
Councillor, you need to finish.
we have maintained unwavering focus on budgets for this work to deliver caring, community-focused services to meet our aim of ending rough sleeping. Thank you.
Councillor Rossetti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The budget full council, more than any other full council, forces us to look at the real financial situation we face and the choices that are made with what is available. This year, the council faces the unprecedented situation of resorting to the government exceptional financial support scheme to cover a gap of 37 million for the coming year. This still will leave us with a forecasted budget gap of 35.1 million for 26-27, rising to a cumulative gap of 121.5 million by 29-30. And that's without talking about the additional government support of 28 million for this current year. The budget always forces council leadership to make choices, often difficult, often political. You have heard my colleagues talking about the what of the choices that we make and deliver. I would like to focus on the how. How do we deliver these choices? How do we deliver these lines of budget? For those who don't know, I'm a member of the audit committee. Councillors, opposition and majority party alike, who like me are familiar with the works of the committee because have served or are serving in it or simply read the reports, know very well the strong questions and concerns about what processes are in place, monitoring controls, tools in place, ability to deliver, auditing, improvement and implementation of recommendation and action plans have been a constant in the past years. I may also add the residents, a question for years, how contracts were managed and monitored, for example, in recent years with respect to leisure services and housing management and repairs. The year-end report we have received in January from KPMG, our external auditors, are laid bare the situation. The report has highlighted, and I quote from the report, significant weakness in arrangements relating to the cost setting and budgetary processes to achieve financial sustainability over the short to medium term, in arrangement relating to the identification and monitoring of cost-saving schemes, in arrangement relating to the commercial properties, and in arrangement relating to procurement, with procurement team having limited visibility on contract management across the council, monitor on KPIs, and almost none at high level of spending decision below £160,000. One doesn't need to be an expert in auditing or quality control to understand what this means. I think it's clear to everyone. The implications are that when there are increasing pressures on the existing and future finances, and we need to deliver those saving schemes, and what the implications are for being able to deliver good value for money to our residents under any financial circumstance. I have no doubt the findings have been taken seriously, and recommendation will be implemented. I hope this will provide an opportunity for a reset, upskilling and improvement on how Haringey delivers its budget and commitment to its residents. And I hope that you will strongly consider our amendments as part of a new attitude to how we manage our contracts. This becomes even more important considering...
Councillor, you need to finish.
Yeah. Considering the amount of borrowing that the council has decided to manage and deliver directly. Haringey residents deserve better and nothing less. Thank you very much.
Councillor Brennan.
As we all know, money is very tight for all local authorities at the moment. We're having to stretch money further than ever before, with increases in demand in adult social care and housing growing ever greater. We're doing everything we can to care for those vulnerable in our borough, while also ensuring that we provide the essential services so necessary for all residents to lead a safe and productive life. The upkeep of the environment in which we live is very important for every resident's day-to-day life. Haringey Council is working harder than ever before to make money work better for us, so we can continue working on the infrastructure so important to the community, while honouring our duty to those most in need. Therefore, in spite of these continuing budget pressures, we have been working hard on the lived environment. Since 2022, more than 150 roads have been resurfaced and more than 60 pavements relaid. As a council, we're aware how important even pavements are for the disabled, the elderly, those pushing prams, and for those with mobility issues. And we care. We're constantly monitoring to try to make sure we cater for these residents' needs. Uneven pavements can be the result of wear and tear, or work by utilities which required the pavements to be disturbed, or indeed can be caused by tree roots pushing up the pavements. This was indeed the case in Muswell Hill on Muswell Hill Road. Thus, when tree roots pushing through the pavement had caused the length of pavement leading up from the high gate to the Broadway to be particularly uneven, I was delighted to see this area quite recently repaved to enable residents to journey to Muswell Hill shops with ease. I was equally pleased to see that a long length of Durnsford Road leading to Bounds Green was recently resurfaced to counter potholes. The Trees for Street initiative in Haringey, where residents and the council jointly sponsored the planting of new trees across their neighbourhood, is a further way in which the council is trying to improve the environment for residents. Residents make a contribution for a tree to be placed in their area, and the council makes a slightly larger contribution and organises the planting and upkeep of the tree. With thanks to Muswell Hill and Fortis Green Association for their support of this scheme, Muswell Hill has been seen the planting of 40 trees for streets in the very recent past, with more planned in the future. While recently out in St Anne's Ward, I was really pleased to see not only that West Green Road had been repaved, but that a number of trees for streets had been planted in among the paving stones. The tree species used for trees for streets are chosen because their roots will not grow to such a size that they cause pavement issues. Thus, with this new initiative, we will see new greener streets while keeping our precious pavements intact. In the 2025-2026 budget, we're investing £8.8 million in maintenance of roads and pavements, which means that we'll be able to relay over 5 kilometres of road and over 6 kilometres of pavements. We're only able to do this due to our management of budget pressures, in spite of the challenging conditions.
Okay. Councillor Emery.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This council has never been in a worse financial position. Reduced to going to central government on bended knee, begging bowl in hand, and yet still I am unconvinced that the administration is taking this seriously. Caseworker to the Leader in Cabinet, Senior Cabinet Support Advisor, Executive Assistant to the Cabinet, another Executive Assistant to the Cabinet, Senior Executive Assistant, Cabinet Advisor, another Cabinet Advisor, and to manage all these different roles, Head of the Leader's Office. No doubt, all these officers work hard, but that's 8 roles working for the Leader's Office, with another political assistant taking it to 9 officers supporting the Labour group. In contrast, the senior management team responsible for the council's corporate functions has been reduced from 6 to 5 members. Each of these roles cost Haringey taxpayers around £65,000 a year, with the last role costing £100,000. For comparison with another borough, Lib Dem run Kingston currently has 3 officers supporting the administration, with 2 of them costing far less than any of these roles. To take another example of the lack of a serious approach this administration is taking, we only need to look outside at the absurd provisions laid on before this meeting. You asked the organisation to cut 10% across the board from staffing costs while still having taxpayers buy you sandwiches. Residents will rightly find this appalling, and I'm sure that Labour councillors sitting opposite know that this is wrong. But even away from these egregious examples, there's 1.5 million worth of savings in the appendix that we provided. We've made these costing changes without the ability to have full sight of the council finances and to do a line-by-line review. However, despite this, we have found savings from our own research with support and confirmation from finance offices. My colleagues have mentioned some, but I'll name a couple just to pick some out. 1. Printing costs. As a borough, you're planning to spend 1.2 million on printing. Does that sound like an organisation with its grip on spending? And 2. The Haringey People magazine. I hate to think of all the good work we could have done for the residents of this borough had you stopped printing this propaganda puff piece in any of the years we've suggested it. Just in the last 3 years alone, we spent over £200,000. That's money we're now borrowing to cover the costs of this magazine that no one reads at 5% interest. These and the others mentioned in Appendix A are all savings approved by your finance team. Supporting these amendments would save the council money, limiting the damage being done by this loan. We all know that there are more hard choices in the coming years. Years when we'll be paying back this government borrowing. Stop waiting for the Labour government to come in and save the day. You know they won't. Back these savings so we can offer residents in the coming years what they need and deserve. Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Despite the financial challenges we face, this Labour administration has continued to work tirelessly to invest in and improve the lives of all our residents, including those who find themselves out of work. This budget continues to do that. Haringey Works offers wraparound support to any resident of the borough who finds himself out of work and has the right to work here in the UK. The programme meets people where they are, helping to alleviate the barriers they face to entering the workforce. People can access an array of support from advice about the jobs available to apply to, skills training, and CV and interview support, just to name a few. The programme has been an unwavering success, with over 1,000 Haringey residents supported into work since 2022. The people supported through Haringey Works are people like Anna, a 65-year-old woman who Haringey Works supported to bridge the digital divide by helping her improve her computer skills and put together a new CV showcasing her experience. There are also residents like Jin Yi, a 23-year-old graduate who was supported into work after several months struggling to find a job after the completion of her degree. Haringey Works sits within the council's inclusive economy framework, Opportunity Haringey. This sets out this council's approach to grow our local economy of over 12,000 businesses in a circular way. A way that retains more money within Haringey, maximising the benefits of growth right here, addresses the unemployment gap between white and global majority communities and supports a just transition to net zero. This concerted effort here in Haringey is vital in the wake of 14 years of economic vandalism in this country. Long may its successes continue.
Councillor Mason.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I've lost 7. Oh, thank you for putting that back. So thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about what's happening in the budget. We rightly talk about the brilliant work taking place in Haringey Council and in our communities. Hard work driving change. But we face unprecedented challenges. Austerity continues. Further cuts to benefits are threatened, and we cannot balance our budget without asking the government to allow us to get into more debt or sell our assets. The future is grim, especially for the third of our residents living in poverty. Surely the certainty of a fair chance of life should be put above rises in military spending. And if there is another promise to be broken, surely that should be to raise taxes for the wealthiest. In Haringey, we're looking at a budget with significant problems, not least in ensuring the best interests of our residents are met. Let's have a quick look at some of the issues. In 3 key areas, we're drastically underfunded and oversubscribed: adult social care, children's social care and homelessness. And in several other areas, our residents are hurting. Huge rises in SEND numbers, which are almost impossible to meet. Over 3,000 families living in temporary accommodation, a waiting list of 13,000. Service charges for residents in council-owned buildings rising for some disproportionately. Food banks closing due to lack of premises. Libraries closed for days each week and decisions made based on data which is not shared. Community buildings are fully or partially closed. We need to have a more open and wider discussion about how we use our resources to make a difference. We need to make sure that all our empty council housing is available for people on the waiting list as soon as possible. In Bounds Green, we had a 3-bedroom street property in good condition, waiting for over 2 years to be ready to let. We have underused owned buildings, crumbling pavements, unlit alleyways. We need to broaden our debate about climate change, bring people with us, and break out of small circles of knowledge and decision making. Our people are the best community asset we have. Let's use our energy to work with people in Haringey, work to keep our libraries open, our community spaces full of people talking, discussing, organising and improving. Build new homes, yes, 3,000, but let's also think
Councillor, you
about
need to finish.
the 13,000 people who are on our waiting list. Let's work together. Let's not forget those in overcrowded, damp accommodation as we pursue 3,000 new homes. Thank you.
Councillor Incaran.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This year continues to be extremely challenging financially for the council. 14 years of austerity and short-sighted policies that fail to invest adequately in this country, its local government, and its people is the cause for this. I know many will point out that we now have a Labour government in power, and you cannot keep blaming the previous administration. The historic Labour victory at the general election last year is very welcome, and we can already see a change in style and substance with the new government prioritizing public services, health, housing, and education. Last year, I stood here asking for a Labour government to do the following: a funding settlement that meets the ever-growing demand and spiraling costs of health and social care, and 2, to reform, to shift the focus from remedial and acute services and sticking plaster solutions towards community-centered preventative models. I'm happy to say that the central government is already starting to deliver on this. To support local governments, the central government has given this local authority significant additional grants. Of course, more needs to be done, and it will take time to incorporate changing priorities within healthcare. The issue of social care needs cross-party support and national consensus and must be resolved. And on this issue, I'm thankful to my Liberal Democrat colleagues who are engaging positively. One of the main challenges we face locally is forecasting growth in demand for our services, particularly adult and social care. I think this is one area which we can improve on, and I want to reassure you all that this is something we take very seriously. I'm happy to say that this Labour administration will continue to invest in adult health and social care. In the coming year, we are investing £130 million into adult health and social care, an increase of £31 million on the last year's budget. We all know that good health does not come in isolation. It requires access to good housing, safe and welcoming outdoor spaces, clean air, and supportive communities, areas that we are investing in. Politics in the end is about choices and priorities, and I'm incredibly proud that despite a very challenging, my most challenging budget yet, this administration continues to prioritize and invest in its communities, particularly the most vulnerable. This is what a Labour administration does, and this is why I'm proud to support this administration and this budget. Thank you.
Councillor Ibrahim.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Chair. I wasn't intending to speak because I'd had a very, very busy day, but having heard some of the speeches, I felt it's important. I never thought I'd find myself in the position where, or actually 11 years on, I'd be one of the councillors standing up and asking all of you to reflect back over a long period of time of where our borough is and how our borough has got here. You know, I've lived in Haringey for the majority of my life, and I know fully well that our borough has gone through many difficult periods. And I heard councillors from the Independent Socialist Group referring to the challenges and the debates we faced around the time of the disagreements about the Haringey development vehicle. Let me tell you something very, very clear. We are in a council chamber where there is a consensus. Every single person in this room, I'm going to quote my colleague, Councillor White, agrees that the future of Haringey is building council homes. Nobody disagrees on that. None of the political groups disagrees on that. So to suggest that what we are agreeing today is in any way comparable to that difficult time is quite frankly incorrect. And I, referred to what my colleague Councillor Small said earlier, and alluded to. The language of socialism is fine words as well as, and that's the bottom line. That's the difference. The language of socialism, colleagues, is changing the material reality of our residents, and we are doing that. We are doing that, and there is no disagreement in this room about this. As somebody growing up in a council home, I know how important that is to our residents, because it's not just a safety net, it's a springboard, and that's what we will achieve if we continue to deliver council homes. So having to set difficult and challenging budgets is not unique to Haringey, and it's not the first time we've had to do this, but the difference is we are continuing to deliver for our residents, and that is the language of socialism. Thank you, colleagues.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thought I wasn't going to be called then. I was relaxing. I wasn't going to use my time to have a go at the Lib Dems, unlike as some of my colleagues have done. But I would just like to take umbrage at the point that Councillor Emery made. I thought that calling out individual people's jobs is actually appalling, whatever point you are making. I know you weren't talking about individuals, but you mentioned individual people's jobs, and I'd just like to say that that's not okay. On to happier things. The Labour Party has always known that the most effective way to change Britain is by changing the lives of its children. But when the finances are constrained, it's also the most effective way of making the biggest difference to our society. Nationally and locally, Labour is delivering on the covenant that we have with younger generations. Locally, we've made children and young people a priority in a borough where we have too often in the past caused headlines for the wrong reasons. That work has happened with the leadership of Perai and the determination of Zena and the hard work of council officers, which has paid off. We've already heard about our consistently strong Ofsted performances. and the ratings that our SEND services got last year. We've also heard about the fastest rollout of school street schemes in London, helping our children to get safely to school and encouraging more of them to walk, bike and scoot and however else they travel. I'm proud to be part of a council that has devoted £68 million to children and young people outside of spending on schools, even when our budgets are tight. But it's not just at council level. We need to use all the levers we have to transform the life chances of children in our borough, our city and our country. So that means building on the work that the London Labour Mayor began with his free school meal programme, for which he won an overwhelming mandate to continue to do so. Well, last week, the Labour government began the first stage of free breakfast for school children, putting up to £450 a year back in parents' pockets, paid for by ending the unfair VAT exemption for private schools. And they announced that 3 Haringey schools will be part of the pilot. If you were to have told me 15 years ago that in 2025 the government would have to intervene to ensure that our children are not sitting through a school day hungry, I would not have believed you. But if we have to intervene to get the basics right, then that is what we will do. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said that breakfast clubs would help break the link between background and success for families. That, to me, is what being in the Labour Party is all about. The fundamental belief that who your parents are should not determine your life chances. That is what we're in politics to do.
Councillor Corley Harrison, can I ask you to respond? You have 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Now, we all know, and residents know, that this is an unprecedented budget. But contrary to the optimistic tone from the councillors opposite, it's not a budget this Labour administration wants to set. It's certainly not a budget that residents want to have set for them as taxpayers. The size of the challenge presented to Haringey cannot be understated. The additional pressures from some of our already most financially demanding services is crippling. But councils up and down the country are having to respond to the challenges faced by the loss of powers and lack of sufficient funding from central government, from past governments under Thatcher, Mayor, Blair, Cameron and the coalition, followed by successive Tory prime ministers, and now under Keir Starmer and the current Labour government. But whilst the majority of councils up and down the country have managed to set a balanced budget without external support, Haringey hasn't. Some have utilised the reserves they have saved up to do so, but after hollowing out Haringey's reserves position over the past decade, it simply cannot do this. And so we are in a position where our significant financial gap has to be bridged by borrowing both in year and to set a balanced budget here tonight. Despite this, as Councillor Emery has mentioned, there are worrying signs that this administration still is not taking the challenge in front of them seriously nor fairly. Is it credible to claim that whilst the Chief Executive cuts the number of directors he has managing all of our budgets and services, the Leader's Office won't do the same? And that we have a budget that doesn't look to reduce the over £1 million on printing as we claim to be going paperless, or thousands spent on producing promotional YouTube videos, many barely scraping 20 views. Now, we understand that you may wish to reject some of our savings proposals, sure. Take them away, reconsider them later. We hope that you do come back again, But Amendment 3 and 4 both propose pilot schemes that will either raise additional funding for this council or provide significant savings over the coming 4 years. They should not be understated, and they come from significant modelling work from your council officers to ensure they are robust and be commenced within this coming year. And approving these amendments, these invest to save pilot schemes, as I said before, is a no-brainer. And finally, Amendment 1 provides the ongoing scrutiny, independent assessments and support and professional expertise to avoid even greater demands from the government next year. Now, you may tell me, Councillor Carlin, that you're already planning to do these things. Great. It's not announced anywhere publicly, and for public reassurance, why not if you are? And if you're not planning to do these boards and have this oversight, why not? What's the harm? This is your opportunity to agree that you need help and accept it. Show to the residents of Haringey that you're putting the council and them ahead of anything else and commit to the additional oversight and ongoing financial management support put before you in the amendment. Because if you don't, the residents will quite rightly claim that Haringey Labour is out of ideas and out of money, and it's time for real change in the running of this borough. Thank you.
Councillor Carlin, you have up to 10 minutes to respond to the debate.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is fairly typical of the party opposite to conveniently fail to acknowledge the financial difficulties that many councils are facing. We're one of 30 who've been provisionally granted exceptional financial support, is not because we have embarked on foolish financial schemes, nor is it because we have been wasting tens of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. It is because of the failed and destructive austerity policies that began with the party opposite in coalition with the Tories. And this is not a funding crisis made in Haringey, not a crisis made by our failing to make sufficient savings. This is driven by an increase in the costs of social care and temporary accommodation primarily, the drivers of the funding shortfall faced by councils up and down the country. We are relieved that we now have a Labour government which is bringing in fairer funding for local authorities. It is a bit much to expect this to have happened in time for this financial year. However, we are grateful and reassured by the fact that we were given funding through from the recovery grant, which was distributed on need and council tax base, and which indicates that we may receive additional funding under the new formula going forward. As a council, we have been working tirelessly to manage rising costs and will continue to do so going forward. The emergency response financial recovery plan, monitored by gold, silver and cabinet panels, is an additional part of this ongoing work. To be clear, it's a continuation of work that is already and was already underway. We would not set up an additional independent panel with all the associated costs unless that was necessary. The budget is already monitored by both OSC and the Audit Committee, and on the Audit Committee, there is an independent member with significant financial expertise. We all acknowledge EFS can only be considered a temporary measure. The £37 million is not the amount that we intend to use. It is the maximum amount that we can use. It is a capitalisation directive and will be considered in combination with our capital programme more generally. We will use as little as possible, and we do not intend to borrow all of the money. Madam Mayor, the specific amendments put forward by the party opposite consist of a number of measures that are already in place, proposals that they rehash every year, and a number that are already being considered. I appreciate that representing wards on the west of the borough, the party opposite may not appreciate that not all our residents are online, and that Haringey people and Home Zone not recognise that there are valuable ways to provide information to our residents. You seem to propose getting rid of these magazines every year, or seem to suggest that we don't actually think about it, but every time we think about it, we actually acknowledge that these magazines are vital for our residents, and that's the reason that they are still being produced. I'm also somewhat surprised that despite Councillor O'Connor being Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny since before I became a councillor, she doesn't seem to understand that the Cabinet has no influence on the papers requested in the OSC work plan, nor which papers go to each panel. This is a decision of the committees, which does receive quarterly updates. But if the committee wishes for additional financial reports to come to committee, then that's for the committee to actually request. In terms of temporary accommodation, we completely agree that we do need to be doing something to reduce our temporary accommodation costs. But there is already a 3-year, £6.5 million savings programme to reduce the cost of temporary accommodation, including incentives for the retention and recruitment of new labour, of landlords, building new lodges in borough, and buying hundreds of properties. I think we have the largest purchasing programme of any local authority, or certainly one of them, in London, with the help of government grants. As I noted earlier, the work to reduce our costs, including Invest to Save and increasing revenue, is an ongoing project across the council, and all possible proposals are being considered. So no, we will not be adopting these proposals tonight. We will be voting on our Labour budget, which delivers a fairer, greener Haringey. Despite our financial difficulties, we are protecting the most vulnerable. We are investing in the services that our residents rely on, and we're taking action to enhance our green and public spaces to build a fairer and greener Haringey. Thank you.
We will now vote on Amendment 1 as outlined in the table papers. In respect of Amendment 1, all those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Amendment 1 is lost. We will now vote on Amendment 2 as outlined in the table papers. In respect of Amendment 2, all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? We will now vote on Amendment 3 as outlined in the table papers. In respect of Amendment 3, all those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Amendment 3 is lost. We will now vote on Amendment 4 as outlined in the table papers. In respect of Amendment 4, all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Amendment 4 is lost. In respect of the substantive recommendations contained at page 278 of the agenda pack, this section is 3.1 of the main report, items A to N. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? The recommendations are agreed. That now concludes the business on the agenda. And the meeting is finished.